How big of a jump can Nolan Winter and John Blackwell make next year? Let's break it down with the expert on Wisconsin. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, recording from the cabin. Really do appreciate everybody jumping on. Today's episode brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Today's episode, we're talking big jumps for Nolan Winter and John Blackwell. Braeden Carrington, is he the defensive stopper? Depth pieces on the team, plus some of your listener questions. We have the great Coach Gauthier jumping on to talk hoops with us. As always, grateful for the time, man. Let's start with Nolan Winter and John Blackwell. So we've done our deep dive, Austin Rapp, Andrew Rohde, Nick Boyd, the players coming in. But what about the players coming back? Let's talk John Blackwell. How good can he be next year?
Well, based on, his jump he made year two from year one, you hope there's another jump from Blackwell's game, on that next step. He got, being Tanjay's, 1A, 1B. So, he's used to having the ball in his hands, being counted on as being a scorer, had, that 37 games of experience under his belt with, expectations and stuff like that. So I would think, just based on experience and being in the fire and stuff, I think we could see another big jump, maybe not as big as from year one to years two. The one thing that, you always have to be not concerned about, but keep in the back of your mind going through the NBA draft process. We saw with Nigel Hayes, and we've seen it with some other players. They get certain feedback of what they need to do better to improve their NBA prospects. And sometimes they adjust their game to try to prove the scouts wrong or show them that they have that in the game. And, they get a little away from doing what they do best because they're trying to prove otherwise. So that's, the only concern, because Nigel came back from when he went through the process and he decided he was going to be a perimeter shooter. And they went through that battle almost, half of the year before he kind of got back to what he was doing. So that's only my one concern with Blackwell is, does he fall in love with proving everybody that he can be more consistent from three, which I would think takes away from his best attribute is being able to score in transition, come off ball screens, get to the rim, get to the paint, and create.
Yeah, I had that same thought. I remember vividly Nigel Hayes coming back and for like a 10-game stretch trying to be Reggie Miller or something. It was like, guy, this is not your game. Stop it.
Ethan Happ too, Ryan. Happ, similar thing with his game and stuff. Remember when he tried to prove that he could be a 3-point shooter and be capable from three, and went through a similar, you're always concerned about that because, as much as we're focused on the Badgers and this and that, and today, those guys are thinking about their future and their NBA career and, making money.
Yeah, the two other things I look at, and with Blackwell, you're talking about a guy who averaged 16 a game. But when we start looking at where can the game grow, I think you bring Nick Boyd in. Blackwell was kind of a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio guy last year. I think Boyd coming in maybe makes him more of that secondary playmaker, which makes the passes easier. It just makes the reads easier because now you're catching it in a spot where you can attack a closeout or off a screen, off some action. And now I think he can improve on that assist to turnover ratio and become kind of that secondary playmaker for the team. I think that's an area where he can grow at because I don't think he's a bad passer. I think he has the IQ to be able to do it.
No, and I think that's a great point on your part. I think he will really benefit of not having the ball in his hands as much as he had. So more of like a Tanjay role last year, to your point, where now you're getting it off a kick or a reversal or whatever, where now the defense has to shift. You're attacking closeouts. You got a little more space. Then, if you have the ball, bringing it up, top of the key, the defense is loaded up. You got, 10 eyes on you. You start to get the defense move around, get in rotations. I think, to your point, it's excellent on your part, is I think he's going to benefit from maybe taking a back seat of not having the ball per se in his hands as much as the beginning, but be more of a pure scorer than a creator, kind of like Tanji was in that role. And obviously he has more ball skills off the bounce than Tanji did. But I think, to your point, with Boyd coming in and stuff, it could be a great benefit to him in his game offensively.
What about him as a shooter? 32% last year, shot better as a freshman. Now, the freshman looks, if you go back and watch them, they're clean looks because he's not keyed on. He's getting easy shots in the corner off the third pass. What is he as a shooter to you? Can he get to 35, 36%? Because I don't think he's a sniper, but if he can get to mid 30s with his ability to attack closeouts and get in the paint, I think you're talking about like a 19, 20 point scorer next year.
I agree with you, Ron. I don't see him as, as a sniper where he's going to get in that 38, 39, 40% range. I do hope to your, could he get to 35 plus mid range? I hope so. I think a lot of it, great. You hit the nail on the head. A lot of clean, uncontested looks his freshman year. This year, when you're on the top of the scouting report, you're not going to get those clean looks. Like you and I have also talked about in the past, and it's a concern going forward, is, he's trying to prove everybody that he is a three-point shooter. And I think especially towards the end of the year, this past season, I think his shot selection got a little worse. And he took a lot of quick shots, forced some quick ones instead of letting the ball come back to him or the offense come around back to him. So I think a lot of it with his shooting and potential improvement, is going to go hand in hand with what is his shot selection going to be like.
Yeah. Do you think that's a growth thing? Like last year with such a big increase in usage rate, because there's a chance that's part of the learning curve. And I'll go back to, I'm a Suns fan. Early on in Devin Booker's career, for example, they said, we're going to put the ball in your hands more and you're just going to learn from that experience. He's much better now because of it. Is this something now where Blackwell has had that usage jump and now he's going to learn to be a little bit more efficient with those shots?
I would hope so, and I would think so. You cannot replace experience. So he has that, like you said, he has that under his belt and stuff like that. Now the question is, especially without having Tanjay, and he's going to be the guy, and the guy that everybody's going to be keen on, is what's his mentality. Like if he feels like he's got to do it all himself, I don't know if he's going to make the jump that you and I think from that standpoint. But if he has more trust in the system and in his teammates that the ball's going to come back around to him, or he can attack a closeout, or he can get on the weak side and attack defenders, and just kind of trust the process more and trust that experience factor, that he doesn't necessarily have to create everything on his own, then I think you could see that. It's not a great black and white answer I'm giving you, but I think a lot of it's really going to have to do with his mindset and his mentality and what he's trying to do.
Can he be the best player on a top 4 Big Ten team? Is he good enough to be the lead dog on that type of team?
I believe so. I really do. If you look at some of the other guys we've talked about in the past, I don't think he's never going to be a pure scorer like Tanjay was. He's not. I don't think, Johnny, you and I hold Johnny Davis and like he's one of the best ever play. I don't think, not to take anything away from him and his abilities, I don't think he's to that level. But if you look at guys in the past, the Ethan Happs and the Nigel Hayeses, and those guys were top guys on a top 4 Big Ten team. The main guys and stuff, and some of the other, guys they had. I know they had Kaminsky and Decker, but that whole team around those guys were a little different. But I do think, and I think he kind of proved it. Him and Tanjay were 1A, 1B, and they were, top 4, 6-ish team in the Big Ten. Him having a third year of experience playing on this level, I do think he can be the 18, 20-point scorer and be on a team that finishes in the upper half of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you need to surround him with the right type of pieces, and you need to, as always, have a little bit of luck with injuries and what happens. But I agree with you there. We're going to take a quick second here. We're going to come back and talk about Blackwell's defense and then get into Nolan Winter and some of the other pieces on this roster, plus the questions you guys submitted in the Discord. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers with Coach Gauthier. First, a quick second for our friends of the show over at today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is absolutely incredible. If you need to get tickets to any type of event, go out and do more things in life, go to Camp Randall to watch these guys that we're talking about. Get some tickets to see John Blackwell next year. Get those tickets on Game Time because you're going to get them cheaper. You're going to get it easier. You're going to get them delivered to your email. You're going to have pictures of the seats before you sit down, and you can get them last minute. Oftentimes on Game Time, the tickets get cheaper the closer the date gets, so you don't have to plan months in advance and go through the logistical hurdles. Plus, if you want to go catch a concert, a musical, theater, whatever, it's on Game Time too. Anything you want to do to spice up your life a little bit, let's do more things in life. Because on your deathbed, you're never going to sit there and say, I did too much stuff. That's never going to happen. So enjoy life. Find those tickets over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase and take the guesswork out of buying tickets. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEG for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's come back with Coach Gauthier. I want to finish up here, man, with Blackwell, and then I want to kind of quickly move on to some other people because I know you traveled today, and I always want to be respectful of your time. Defensively with John Blackwell, I love John Blackwell. I'm a big Blackwell fan. To me, it felt like it's tough. I don't want to. It just doesn't feel like the output matched up to the physical tools. It feels like he should be better defensively. Is that unrealistic, or where am I at wrong or right on this?
No, I think I know what you're getting at, and I have the same feeling because you saw it his freshman year. He was locked in on the defense end. Now he didn't have to have much of the offensive burden on his shoulders and stuff, but I like to use the word engaged. And to your point, I don't feel like Blackwell is nearly engaged on the defense end his second year as he was his first year. Understanding though, like you and I have talked, in the past and as we talk about Blackwell in his game, things have changed. He's counted on offensively. So guys, like we've talked in the past and as the coaching staff, players they're going to rest on the floor at some point, especially when you play 35 plus minutes like he does a game. So where's he going to choose to maybe catch that rest or take that little break? It's going to be on the defense end more than the offense end because so much is expected of him offensively. I would just like him maybe to be a little more engaged and a little more competitive, make it a little more important to him to get those stops or be that stopper on occasion when they need it to. Because, like you said, especially down the stretch, he was getting attacked. I mean, they were isolating him and attacking him, and he was getting beat on a regular basis. And you and I both, I agree with you 100%. I think he's way better than what he showed on the defense end. And I think a lot of it is, I don't think it's for him. I don't think it's ability or athleticism or anything like that. I think it's more of, like I said, his level of engagement on the defense end.
Yeah, because I think the physical tools are there. It's frame, it's size, it's competitiveness, it's strength, it's wingspan. He can do what he needs to do. Foot speed,
physicality.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the Big Ten to take some of those bigger guards and wings. Let's talk Nolan Winter. Nolan Winter to me is fascinating because I think we saw a lot of what Blackwell was last year. I do think it's going to get more efficient and better for him. But Winter played 21 minutes a game. But analytically, you're talking like 98th percentile in points per possession, like 90th percentile in spot up shooting. Like he was really, really good from the numbers metric standpoint. What does it look like with 30 minutes a game, 32 minutes a game for him?
I'm with you. And, you could call me the ringleader for the Nolan Winter bandwagon. I love Nolan's game. His jump he made last year from year one to year two, even in the beginning, he kind of got off to a slow start in the sense it kind of looked like he was going to be out physical and struggle with bigger, more physical guys and what was trying to play more on the perimeter. But as that year went along and he got confidence, I mean, if you look at it, Ryan, he put up better numbers than Steven Crowell did. From a field goal percentage. Now he didn't shoot as well from three as Crowell did, but he took more three attempts, and his rebounding numbers were actually better than Crowell. Like he had 64 offensive rebounds. He was, so I just love his game. I think his growth, 10 points a game. He was at 5 5+ rebounds. I think there's no reason he can't be a 13, 14-point guy, 8 rebound. I would love to see him be a walking double-double. I just think his versatility, he's stepped up from a physical standpoint. He's a willing banger. He's a good defender. He gets on the glass. You and I both I think he's a tailor-made 2025 4-man. Obviously, I think they're going to play him at the 5 with Rap coming in. But his versatility, I just think sky's the limit for this kid, and I'm just really excited to see what he has in store for us.
Yeah, you and I are on the same page here, man. I think defensively he's pretty good too. He moves well in space. He can switch. He the other thing with Winter battles on the glass, in the post. There are some bigs that out physical him, but the dude battles. He makes it difficult on guys, and then he can switch out on the perimeter and guard a little bit. And then at the 5 offensively, like, so I hear you. I think the dream scenario is you have a banger at a 5 and Crowell on Winter's your 4. But as a 5, he's going to pull some big men out, and he's going to give them nightmares on the perimeter.
Exactly. And I think another thing that you're kind of alluding to, and we talked about, I think he has a little it factor. He has an edge. He plays with an edge. And I think that's what you and I like. Like, there's no qualms about him going against more physical 5s because, I think he thinks he's the best player on the floor, and I think he plays with an edge. And I think the Badgers in total last year played with more of an edge than we've seen from guys. And that was the knock on Crowell, that you and myself and others would get frustrated with Crowell, as he didn't seem to play with an edge or didn't have an edge night in, night out. I think Nolan has that edge where he's not going to put up with anything from anybody. And I think one area of growth that I think he's capable of doing, but we talk about it, his passing ability out of the post. Now, he had a positive assist to turnover ratio, was just over, it was like 1.1. So he needs to make a jump because that's what Crowell was so good at. But I just think Winter's game, it just keeps on evolving and stuff. If he can make that jump where he's 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, like you said, they're playing him at the 5. Well, a 5's going to have to guard him. He's pulling them away from the basket. There's not a lot of 5s in the Big Ten or other leagues that I think are going to be able to match up with him.
No, I think he's going to be a nightmare defensively to guard. This is actually a great spot to get into a couple questions we had, because we had a couple people. Jason said, is Winter good enough to fill Big Steve's shoes? Or I don't think it's the weakest link on the team here. I think the question for me with this one that Jason submitted is, last year so much of the offense was put the ball into Crowell, space around him. If they double, we're going to find the open shooter. If not, he's going to score in the post. Can Winter be a guy you throw the ball into the post and initiate out of the post with?
I don't think that's his main part of the game, but can he do it? Is he capable of it? Yes. Do I think their offense is going to even evolve a little more, and it's going to be more high post, top of the key, running into, Euro type actions, grenade type actions, Spain type actions? I think you're going to see a lot more of that than typically throw it in the post and space around. Can he do that? Absolutely, but I don't think that's going to be his main thing. And to Jason's point, Winkus Link, I don't think so. I think he might be their most valuable player, in my opinion. And I think we might be having this discussion a year from now, is how do we replace Nolan Winter, because he might be in the NBA draft and stay in the NBA draft. That's how much I believe in his ability and his upside. I think if all things go according to plan, I think he might be leaving early for the NBA. That's how much I believe in his abilities.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I also agree with you. I don't think it's his game to do what Crowell did. I do think people continue to underestimate how hard it is to find big men that have advanced passing skills. That's not something that you can just replicate. And there's also a physical style. If you go think of the best passing centers, a lot of times they're bigger, more physical, because they can hold off defenders. You think of a Vlade Divac, you think of a Jokic. Crowell was big enough where he could back people down but stay under physical control, which is more difficult for a leaner forward. So
yeah, and I have a question for you, Ryan, because you're closer to all this than I am. Is I almost think too that Penny and Guard's offense, how they really want to run it and how they've changed it, I think they kind of tweaked it more to fit more into Crowell's game. Then I think there's another evolution to it, to more spacing, more 5-out type of action that Winter, and I think that's why you see them, they went after wraps so early that I think, correct me, this question for you, but I think there's another level or an evolution to Penny and Guard's offense that they want to run that maybe be moving away more from what Crowell's skills were.
I think that's a great question, because if you go and watch, I was watching Hayden Jones and Jackson Ball, the New Zealand kids they picked up. And obviously that's where Penny is drawing a lot of this from. When you go watch them, there's no post player. Like it is 5-out, interchange, move, drive and kick. It is that type of offense. It's really free flowing. And the other thing I'd say is I think Penny is the type of coach, and Guard is the type of coach that's given him the freedom to do this, but Penny's the type of coach that is going to adjust to what makes sense within the scheme of what he wants to do. Like there's certain principles. We're going to space it. We're going to shoot the ball. But if I have a post that works, we're going to do that. If I have 5-out that works, we're going to do that. I think it's a great point that you bring up. And I do think they're going to play it more to Winter strengths and get away from a little bit of what they did with Crowell, because it doesn't make as much sense. I think it's a great point. All right. We're going to take one more quick break. I have a couple more questions to get into that people submitted. Plus, I want to talk about Braeden Carrington and Jack Janicki and a couple of the freshmen. This is a jam-packed show with Coach. As always, really do appreciate his time and appreciate everybody for tuning into Locked On Badgers and spending a little bit of your time here. Only so much time in the day, and we appreciate you guys jumping on with us. All right, we're coming back to the show. A couple more user questions that we got submitted that I want to get into. We were talking about Winter and Crowell, Coach, so I want to hit you with this one before we completely shift off topic. This from DDBA, he said, as Blackwell and Winter increase their usage, what are we going to do to maybe generate more looks for them?
Great point. Great question here. And I think the answer lies in the Boyd, right? I mean, I think Boyd, that's why they're bringing him in with his experience. We've talked about it. He's a true PG that creates first for others. That, yes, Chucky was a true PG, but his style and his game's a little different from Boyd. I think that's how we generate more looks from them, Blackwell and Winter, is I think it's through Boyd.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Let's talk about Braeden Carrington. And we're not going to spend quite as much time on Carrington as we did the other transfers, because he's more of a bench guy, coming from Tulsa last year, 2 years at Minnesota, 6'4", 6'5", senior guy, averaged 27 minutes per game last year, shot 35% from three, 33% from three. I have it right here. 33% from three with a pretty decent amount of volume. Thoughts on Braeden Carrington, who is nominally now probably your sixth man off the bench?
Yeah, he's an interesting, I was looking more at him this morning, studying him a little bit and stuff. And like, to your point, Ryan, 33% from three, now 77% of his attempts were threes. So I think he's more of that catch and shoot guy. He's got good size, 6'5", they have him listed as 6'5", 200. But he doesn't really do, he's more of a 3-and-D guy, in what I've seen and what I've watched on him. He's a hard read for me, because you look at what he did his first 2 years at Minnesota, played in 51 games, started 10 of them, played around 20 minutes a game, averaged 5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, put up decent numbers with Minnesota. Where I kind of struggle in seeing how this all plays out is, he was a part-time starter at Tulsa. He was playing 27 minutes a game, but his numbers really didn't change that much. He only scored 7.4 points a game, similar rebounding numbers, similar statistics and stuff like that. And that's obviously not the level of the Big Ten. So, he went down and his numbers really didn't kind of change. So it kind of tells me he kind of is who he is. Does he really have a jump? Like, why did he? Obviously, when he left Minnesota, he had to go down a level, and now he's going back up. What's the upside? What's the jump there? I'm not really sure. I think, probably to your point, I think they like him off the bench because he has experience, older guy, bigger body, used to the Big Ten. That's kind of kind of I throw that back to you is kind of what do you see? It's a really hard read for me I think he's just going to play a specific role and give him spot minutes.
Yeah, I think you're on there. I think he's a guy, as the game flow happens, as the script is unfolding, you could probably bring him in at the 1, the 2, or the 3. He's physical enough, I think, to hold up against 3s, and he's athletic enough and smart enough, I think, to hold up against 1s. So right there, you have some defensive versatility, a band-aid you can put across those spots. I like watching film of him, breaking him down a little bit on synergy when I was able to. You see intelligence defensively. He's not the quickest guy, but he closes out, understanding his spacing, his length. He knows what his advantages are. I think he's a solid defensive piece that you're going to be able to add into this rotation, play 20 minutes, put him at, wing if there's an athletic wing, put him at point guard if there's a guy getting downhill. And then from an offensive standpoint, it's just all spacing. You just got to go shoot space it in the corner, space it in the wing, shoot the open shot. Don't do much else. I was frankly kind of surprised, and I wish I would have seen him drive more. There were times people are closing out, and he should be athletic and big enough at that level to get to the rim, and he just wasn't. So I think, to your point, he is who he is. You space the floor, you hit open shots, and then you play hard defense.
I'm wondering, and that's really interesting on your part. You talk about that. I wonder if can he be their Kari McGee type with not obviously not he's not a pure point like Kamari was, but could he play that role like you said, ball in his hands, good solid defensively, count on him in spots, knock down open shots. I could see, and obviously he has more size and physicality than Kamari did, but I'm wondering if he could fill McGee's role of 15 to 20 minutes type. Like I said, it's a hard jump because you would think for a guy that went from Minnesota to Tulsa that you'd see his numbers kind of improve more. But then obviously the Badgers and the staff, evaluated and, like what they saw. So, I think to your point, I think he's going to be a depth piece, good defensively. And I just think they like his experience. And I think they're going to be able to trust he is who he is. I think they're going to be able to trust him, putting him on the floor.
Yeah. And there's value in knowing what you're going to get from a guy.
Absolutely.
For 15 to 20 minutes, we know we're going to get solid defense and the ability to hit open shots and nothing else. But that's okay, because we also know we're not going to get defensive lapses, and we're not going to get someone driving in and committing turnovers.
You're 100%, as a coach, you're not asking guys to be more or do more than they're capable of doing, but you're putting them out there because you have a trust level and you just want them to be them and not try to do more. And I think that's probably what the Badgers and their staff seeing him. And I think he, like you said, he's going to have to play a huge role for them.
I think this next guy is a big X factor next year. Does Jack Janicki take a big step up? Because last year, listen, you and I talked a lot last year, both on the show and off the show. And there was that kind of mid-season spurt where he played really well, made some game-altering hustle plays, shot the ball pretty well. And then the rest of the year, he kind of went into a shooting slump, and the impact tailored off. Still very young. Was a redshirt freshman last year. But is there a jump here? Shot 27% from 3, 33% from the line. I think both those numbers are mirages. He's a better shooter than that, in my opinion. But still, where is the jump here if there is one?
This one is the one that I go back and forth, depending on the day, the hour, the conversation you and I might have on him. Like I said, there were times where I'd text you and I was like, Janiki and Gilmore won us those games.
Mm-hmm.
And then down the stretch in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament, I was saying, they got to get Janiki off the floor. What are they doing? Teams are going at him. So to your point, I don't know. Excuse me. But I do think I look at, if you would have told me Carter Gilmore was going to turn into the player that he turned into and play the role that he played for them on a really good team and the improvement he made, like Janiki's way ahead of where Gilmore was when he started his career at Wisconsin. So if Gilmore put in that kind of work and effort and improvement to become the player he can, who am I to say that Jack Janicki can't make that same jump? Because you and I both know, and you're closer to the program than I am, but everything I've heard about him, the guy is all about basketball,
Mm.
and he's a hard worker, and he wants to be good. So, I tend not to bet against guys that have that sort of mentality, that work ethic. That I think, does he have a lot of room for improvement, especially from a shooting standpoint? Absolutely. But I think he's going to do everything in his power. And like you said, and a second round NCAA tournament team, upper echelon of the Big Ten, he played significant minutes down the stretch in big games. So obviously they have that confidence, and they think he has that ability. So I do think he's going to take a jump. It's just how much of a realistic jump can we count on based on he does, like you brought up, he does have limitations.
The interesting thing with him too, to me, is when you go under the hood, 31 assists, 8 turnovers. Again, it's small sample size, but it's a 4-to-1 assist to turnover ratio for a young player. And I think the eye test bears that out too. He has a feel for the game. It's some of the other things that need to come into place, but it feels like he sees the game pretty well and could be I mentioned a secondary playmaker for Blackwell. He could grow into that role as well, I think.
Absolutely. And, you brought up a great point. I meant to mention that about his assist to turnover ratio. He could be a poor man's Max Klesmit. I don't think he'll ever shoot it. Now, Max had a down year shooting last year, but all in all, I think Max was pretty solid, above average perimeter shooter. Do I think Janiki can become as good a shooter as Max? I wouldn't bank on it, but does Janiki's game resemble Max to your point where you're saying, Ryan, about IQ, knowing how to play, just, doing the intangibles, the assist to turnover ratio, having a feel? That's what Klesmit excelled at, and that's what Janiki has shown. So I could see him doing what Klesmit did, in terms of the intangibles.
Let me hit a couple of these questions here on the way out the door. I know I'm already keeping you 2 minutes too long.
Oh, you're good.
This was from Badger CA94. Big picture, is the overall roster good enough to contend for a top 4 conference? And then he also asks about the front court depth, which we've hit on a bunch of times.
I'll be interested to see how you answer this, Ryan. To me, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. First of all, the conference is a bear. Bringing in UCLA, USC is going to be better. The coach at Washington is really good. They're going to be better. You and I have talked off air. Ben McCollum and his staff at Iowa, that's a home run hire. That guy he's as good as they come. Minnesota, again, Nico. So you're talking, these are teams we talked about at the bottom of the league or middle part of the league that are getting better. And then that's not counting your Purdue's, your Michigan States, your Illinois. Like, it's one hell of a conference. And I got to be honest, I am just really concerned about the depth and the overall roster being able to be a top 4 in the conference. I think is going to be a little difficult.
I agree. And last year's team exceeded my expectations as well, but it needed an All-American season essentially from John Tonje to do that. I don't think that's on this roster this year, and I worry greatly about the post depth. I think, I worry about the wing depth too. If you lose a guy on the wing, who's your backup 3?
Yeah, and the other thing we talked about, in our last show is I worry about defensively. I mean, that was their limitation last year, and I don't see where they've gotten much better to take a significant group jump defensively. So, it's just hard to win on a regular basis when you're trying to outscore everybody.
Oh, next question here. If we don't add a post defensive option big, which I know they're still looking to add a big, the plan is to add another big. Now, what kind of big that is it a vote caliber at this point, or is it more likely it's a Greppy type guy? But if we don't, are they just going to use the offense as defense? Is it just become, let's make it rain, let's build leads, and let's force other teams away from their post game?
Great question, Storm Shadow. Great question. I mean, is that much different than what we did this past season?
Not really.
To be honest with you, I mean, I know the concern, and I see Storm Shadow's question, the concern is they don't have a crowd that was able to at least kind of give them some interior defense and bang around. We talked about Nolan, that, you know, he can do it. It's not his strong suit, but he can do it. But after that, on this roster, Ryan, who can? So, but they kind of bombs the way last year, and that's how they won games. But like you said, it took an All-American season from Tanjay, and they, you know, can they shoot it better this year or similar? Yes, but again, you know, nights where you don't shoot it well, that, you know, when those times that they didn't, you know, it was difficult for them to win. So it's hard to rely on bombs away, spread everybody out, make them adjust to you, especially when your Jimmy and Joe's aren't better than the other team's Jimmy and Joe's. And so when you're talking about the upper echelon of not only the Big Ten, but the NCAA, when we're talking about getting to the second weekend and stuff like that, is that strategy or style of play going to work to get the Badgers to a championship type of level? That might be a big ask.
I would say it almost has to, right? With this roster, like there's a chance when you look at you're replacing a Max Klesmit who didn't shoot very well last year, or you bring in a Nick Boyd who's probably going to shoot pretty well. Rapp could shoot better than Winter did last year. At least he's going to shoot more volume. Rapp's going to let him fly. Crowell, we both really like, but Crowell was a hesitant 3-point shooter. Winter out there on the perimeter is going to let it fly a little more frequently, a little more often, which is going to put more stress on a defense. There were times, even with Crowell's percentage, you could tell defenses weren't fully closing out because they didn't really buy it, because Crowell didn't really buy it at times.
Correct.
Now you have Rhodey coming in as well. We mentioned Blackwell shooting 32% last year. I think that could go up. I don't know, man. And, you know, if Carrington coming off the bench, who shot, as you mentioned, 70% of his threes last year, or shots were threes last year. Collectively, 1 through 6, this team could be a much more consistent shooting group, even outside of Tanjay, which is going to be interesting to track.
No, I agree with you. I think from a shooting standpoint, they could be better or have the potential to be better. My other question is, though, from a shooting standpoint, and this is kind of oxymoron, but from a scoring standpoint, will they be better? You know, because do they have guys that can, you know, and that's where maybe Boyd comes in, and, you know, but, you know, Tanjay shot really well from 3, obviously, but he just was a scorer. Is Blackwell has another level to, you know, it's just, I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs, but I agree from you from an overall shooting standpoint. I think this team has the potential and room to be better from a perimeter shooting standpoint. I just don't know from an overall scoring standpoint. It'd be interesting to see how the pieces fit. And I think a lot of that has to do with our questions with what kind of scoring and depth are they bringing off the bench? I think, you know, 1 through 5, pretty solid. But after that, I think there's a lot of question marks.
Yeah, it's a good point with the scoring, because you're replacing, I don't think people forget, but you're replacing Tanjay's free throw production, which was absolutely insane last year. And that was a huge part of his game. Coach, man, as always, I kept you for 8 minutes longer than I was supposed to. As always, we really appreciate the insight. Thank you for answering some questions from the community. Really appreciate you, man. These shows are always awesome.
No, I really enjoy it, Ryan. I wanted to thank the Badgers community and stuff as well. Unbelievable. That the questions are awesome. You can tell everybody's very knowledgeable and they ask the right questions. And I just love being a part of it. I appreciate you and everybody turning in and listen to me ramble.
Dude, On Wisconsin is always good to listen to you ramble, because we get smarter. That's the whole point of this show, is to bring people on that make people smarter. You definitely fit into that mix, and yeah, appreciate it as always. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you for watching on Locked On Badgers. Bunch more content coming up this week as official visits are happening. We'll have Nick Osen on later. Bunch of content as always on Wisconsin, and we will definitely talk to you later.